Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a massive stack of sources, specifically a collection of theological treatises and the very dense 17th century texts of Puritan theologian John Owen.
Right, and the goal for this session is to do a deep dive into those materials to extract the core mechanics of his arguments.
Yeah, our objective is to examine a specific, staggering concept from his work, which is the unseen glory of Christ in the discharge of his mediatory office.
And that involves looking at two massive concepts, really. What he did in his act of obedience and, well, what he suffered.
So to start, I want you to imagine, for a moment, that you are standing in the middle of a world-renowned art museum.
Oh, that is a great way to frame this.
Yeah, so the room is quiet, the lighting is carefully controlled, and right in front of you, taking up an entire wall, is an absolute masterpiece.
But there is a catch, right?
Right. The entire canvas, from corner to corner, is covered by a heavy, opaque velvet veil.
You know, intellectually, that something magnificent is underneath that fabric because of a little plaque on the wall.
Yes, but your eyes cannot perceive a single brushstroke. Not a single hue of color or any trace of the artist's genius.
To you and to everyone else walking by, it just looks like a massive dark cloth.
And that is the very concept we are unpacking today.
That image of the veil sets up the entire premise of Owen's work, honestly. When human beings think about glory, our expectation always leans toward the visible.
Like the kinetic, right? The flashy stuff.
Spot on. We expect glory to look like a conquering king, or a dazzling display of wealth, or undeniable social dominance.
But John Owen introduces a completely different reality here.
He does. He argues that a staggering glory accompanied Christ in absolutely everything he did and everything he suffered.
The issue is not that the glory was absent, though.
No, not at all. The issue is that the world was looking for a completely different currency.
And the goal of our discussion today is to lift that veil for you, the listener, and show you the mechanics of that reality beneath the surface.
Owen points out that this glory was entirely unseen by the eyes of the general public.
He states plainly that if the world had actually perceived it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory.
Right, because the world looked at him and saw nothing desirable.
Yet on the flip side, you have believers like the Apostle John saying that they beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father.
Which brings to mind Isaiah 53, where the prophet writes that he had no form nor comeliness, that we should desire him.
It makes me think of that real-world event involving the musician Joshua Bell.
Oh, yeah, the subway experiment.
Yeah, a few years ago, this world-class, masterful musician took a multi-million-dollar Stradivarius violin and stood in a busy subway station in Washington, D.C.
Right during the morning rush hour, if I remember correctly.
Yes, the absolute worst time for foot traffic.
Yeah.
And he played the most exquisite, flawless music ever composed, but everyone just rushed past.
People were annoyed by the noise, looking at their phones, irritated that this person was in their way.
They completely missed the majesty happening right in front of their faces.
It is a striking parallel.
But here's my question. Why is human perception so broken that the creator of the universe could walk right among us doing these astonishing things and be seen as entirely unimpressive?
That is the big question, isn't it?
I mean, if his glory is moral and spiritual, shouldn't human beings who supposedly have a conscience be able to recognize basic moral perfection when they see it?
You are hitting on a core theological issue regarding the state of human perception. It really comes down to the nature of the glory itself, combined with the epistemological blindness of fallen humanity.
So our internal radar is just broken.
Basically, yes. True glory is not always loud. It is not always visually dazzling or accompanied by a grand spectacle.
In the context of Christ's life and work, the glory Owen is writing about is intensely moral and spiritual.
And our physical eyes are naturally calibrated to see physical impressiveness, like wealth, status, physical beauty, political dominance.
But moral and spiritual glory requires spiritual eyes to see.
To answer your question about basic human conscience, yes, people can recognize civic goodness or kindness.
Like helping an old lady cross the street.
Sure, but the crowds in the first century were not looking for moral perfection. They were looking for a military deliverer.
A political king who would throw off the Roman occupation with force.
Right. Their metric for glory was entirely external and earthly. Because they were judging by the flesh, they looked right past the infinite moral perfection standing in front of them.
They could not perceive the majesty of supreme humility because their own hearts were calibrated to pride.
That is incredibly well said.
And that is a challenging thought to turn back on ourselves for you listening right now. Think about your own life for a second.
How often do you judge the value of something, or even the value of a person, by their external shine?
We are so easily captivated by the loudest voice in the room, the most polished presentation, the highest subscriber count.
We are drawn to the spectacle, and in doing so, we completely miss the quiet, substantial reality underneath.
If the ultimate perfection of the universe walked the earth and was deemed unimpressive by the crowds, it should make us seriously question the metrics we use to evaluate what is truly valuable.
But if this glory was not visible in a physical radiance, it had to be visible in action.
Which means we need to look at the first major category. Owen highlights his obedience.
Owen is very precise in how he defines the anatomy of this obedience.
To grasp the magnitude of what Christ did, we first have to establish our own baseline, right?
Yes. For human beings, obedience is a mandatory obligation. It is baked into our created nature.
Because we are created beings, we are necessarily subject to the law of our Creator.
We have to obey the law of God. Therefore, the absolute best we can ever offer is a voluntary compliance with an unavoidable command.
Our obedience is a duty. We owe it.
But Christ's obedience had a totally different formal nature.
I want to pause here and challenge this a bit, because this is where the mind starts to bend. If he became human, if he actually took on flesh and walked around in the first century, wasn't he obligated to follow the rules of being human?
That is the logical assumption, sure.
I mean, if you are a man, aren't you under the law of men? I am trying to picture this. It is like a sovereign king who rules an entire country and makes all the laws.
Okay, value.
One day, he chooses to step down from his throne, put on rough peasant clothes, move into a tiny village, and willingly submit himself to the local tax collector.
He is technically above the law because he wrote the law.
Right, but he submits to it by his own free, unforced choice. Is that what Owen is getting at?
The king analogy gets us part of the way there, but it actually falls short of the full reality Owen is describing.
How so?
Well, a human king, even one who writes the civic laws, is still a created being and is therefore still under God's moral law. He still owes obedience to God.
Ah, right. The human king is still a creature.
Right. Owen takes this a step further. Relying on passages like Psalm 40, "Lo, I come to do thy will, O my God," Owen highlights that Christ's act of his own will and choice preceded any obligation whatsoever.
So he obeyed because he would, well before he obeyed because he ought.
Spot on. In his divine person, he was the Lord of the law. He was infinitely above it.
He was no more subject to its commands than he was to its curse.
His decision to be made of a woman, and thereby made under the law, as Galatians 4 puts it, was an act of infinite condescension.
So his obedience began with a covenantal choice made in eternity past, before any earthly obligation ever existed.
He was totally free from its demands, which means every single act of submission was a completely free gift.
That distinction changes everything. Owen uses an illustration from the Gospels to prove this point, focusing on the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 3.
John the Baptist looks at Jesus coming into the water and is completely confused.
John knows who Jesus is. He knows Jesus has absolutely no need to undergo a baptism of repentance.
John tries to decline, basically saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and you are coming to me."
But Jesus replies, "Suffer it to be so now, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness."
Jesus is saying, "I have undertaken this willingly. I am doing this of my own accord. I have zero personal need for this, but I am choosing to discharge this duty."
When a king, who is universally Lord of all, voluntarily submits himself to universal obedience, it carries an undeniable, staggering evidence of grace.
But wait, if his obedience was a completely free choice, that creates a massive legal loophole.
Right, he generated a surplus of righteousness.
Where does that surplus go, since he doesn't need it to justify himself?
That is the exact mechanical question that drives the rest of Owen's argument.
Because he was not forced to obey for his own sake, the legal merit of his obedience could be applied to others.
This brings us to the application of his work, based on Romans 5:19, which states that by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous.
The use and end of this perfect obedience was never for himself. It was entirely for the church.
The surplus you mention is the very foundation of justification.
This brings up the most massive contrast in this entire theological framework.
We have our situation and we have his situation.
We are entirely obliged to obey the law, but we are completely unable to actually perform it. We fail constantly.
On the other hand, he was not obliged to obey it, yet he performed it flawlessly.
Because of that dynamic, His obedience can stand in the place of our failure. It is credited to the church.
It is less like passing a school test and more like a massive corporate merger.
I like that. Walk me through that analogy.
Think about a subsidiary company that is completely bankrupt, drowning in billions of dollars of toxic debt, and completely unable to pay its creditors.
A totally hopeless financial situation.
Yeah, totally ruined.
Wow.
Then a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate acquires that failing company.
The moment that merger is signed, the conglomerate's flawless credit rating instantly becomes the subsidiary's credit rating.
The debt is swallowed by the infinite surplus of the parent company.
That is a staggering thought.
For you listening right now, think about the heavy weight of your own failures.
Think about the sheer exhaustion of trying to constantly measure up, whether it is to God's standard, society's standard, or even the impossible standards you set for yourself.
The sheer beauty of Owen's point is that another person's perfect credit rating is legally transferred to your account.
The relief that reality provides is difficult to overstate. It means the listener does not have to generate their own perfect righteousness.
The pressure to justify yourself is removed because the justification has been provided from the outside.
In theological terms, this relies on federal headship, the idea that Christ acts as a representative for his people.
Just as Adam acted as a representative for humanity in the beginning.
But to fully appreciate that substitution, we have to look closely at the quality of the obedience that was substituted for us.
It is one thing to have a representative. It is another thing to examine the actual historical performance of that representative under pressure.
We are talking about an obedience that was universally perfect.
Owen makes a claim here that really stops you in your tracks. He argues that Christ's active obedience represents the holiness of God even better than the 10 Commandments written on tables of stone.
It is a better representation than the law written on believers' hearts.
It is the ultimate living mirror of absolute holiness.
The 10 Commandments are the written standard. They outline the parameters of justice and righteousness.
But the life of Christ is the flawless living execution of that standard in real time, dealing with real human issues.
In him alone, human nature fully and completely matched the holiness of God.
However, achieving that flawless execution in a fallen world was not a sterile, easy process in a vacuum.
We have to confront the reality of the opposition he faced to understand the mechanics of this obedience.
I have a text that always causes a bit of friction in my mind regarding this. I'm talking about Hebrews 5:8, which says, "Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered."
That is a very common text people struggle with.
Right, because if he was already perfectly holy and he was already God incarnate, how does a perfect being learn obedience?
The word learn implies moving from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge, or from imperfection to perfection.
So how does that function here?
That is a critical distinction to make. When Owen writes about this, he clarifies that Christ had absolutely no internal disorder.
There was no internal sin, no rebellion, no hesitation, making obedience difficult for him from the inside.
For us, obedience is hard because our hearts are divided. We naturally want to rebel against authority.
He had none of that internal friction.
Therefore, the learning mentioned in Hebrews was strictly experiential.
The Greek concept points toward experiential acquisition.
He wrought out this perfect obedience against massive, relentless external opposition. He experienced what it cost to obey in a hostile environment.
He faced temptations, brutal sufferings, public reproaches, and constant contradictions from the people around him.
I picture it like a highly complex, delicate medical procedure.
Like what kind of procedure?
Imagine a world-class surgeon trying to perform open-heart surgery. It requires perfect concentration, perfect precision, absolute stillness of mind.
Now imagine trying to perform that delicate surgery not in a sterile, quiet operating room, but in the middle of an active war zone.
With the building shaking, people screaming insults at the surgeon, and a chaotic crowd doing everything in their capacity to distract and destroy the process.
Christ maintained an absolute, flawless perfection of love, justice, and submission to the Father under the most hostile, agonizing external conditions imaginable.
This staggering level of flawless performance becomes even more mind-bending when you consider the specific identity of the person performing these actions.
This was not an angel. This was not just a very disciplined prophet.
Owen spends a significant amount of time highlighting the astounding paradox of the God-man.
We are dealing with two natures, divine and human, united in one single person.
The theological mechanics of this are immense.
The contrasts Owen lists in this section are just awe-inspiring. He was the Lord of all creation, yet he lived his entire earthly life with zero reputation.
He is the infinite being to whom all prayer in the universe is directed, yet he humbled himself to pray night and day.
He is constantly worshipped by legions of angels, yet he engaged in the daily, humble duties of corporate worship in a local synagogue.
He is the creator who formed all men like clay in a potter's hand, yet he strictly observed every rule of justice and charity toward those very same clay vessels.
Those contradictions are the very definition of mysterious glory.
The one who built the house willingly performed the most menial chores inside it.
He did not leverage his infinite status to bypass the ordinary, humiliating aspects of human existence.
He embraced them fully to fulfill the requirements of the law on behalf of those he represented.
It makes me think of an architect who designs a massive, futuristic, billion-dollar skyscraper.
He draws every blueprint, engineers every support beam, and legally owns the entire property.
But instead of living in the penthouse suite and managing things from a distance, he decides to spend his life quietly cleaning the basement bathrooms of that same building.
Treating all the tenants who track mud across the floors with the utmost respect and charity.
The ontological shock of the creator submitting to his creation defies human logic.
And for you, listening right now, consider your own pride in light of this.
When you feel slighted, or when you feel like you are not getting the recognition you deserve at your job or in your family, look at the creator of the universe.
Look at him living in strict obedience and total obscurity.
We get so defensive over the tiniest perceived insults, while the Lord of all creation washed the dirty feet of men who are about to abandon him.
His active obedience was an uninterrupted display of condescension.
But that life of humble, active obedience inevitably collided with the darkness of the world.
And that collision led directly to the second major category of Christ's mediatory office, his suffering.
Owen notes that while victory and success certainly belonged to his office, suffering absolutely had to come first.
The scriptures are clear. Ought not Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory?
As we shift from what he did to what he suffered, Owen issues a very strong warning.
He notes that the human mind naturally recoils at the depth of this suffering.
We cannot fathom it. We can only look at it under a veil.
We are talking about bearing the weight of the wrath of God, the curse of the law, and the utmost evil that God had ever threatened against sin.
But I want to clarify the mechanical sources of this suffering.
Sure, let's break that down.
When we talk about the Passion of Christ, we usually just think of the physical cross, the nails, the thorns, the physical asphyxiation.
Which is horrific on its own, naturally.
Yes, but Owen paints a much darker, much broader picture. Where is all the suffering actually coming from, and why did God the Father strike him?
The physical agony of the crucifixion was horrific, but it was only the visible surface of a multi-front assault.
Owen details an agony that goes far beyond Roman execution methods.
He points to the bloody sweat in the garden, the strong cries and supplications, the soul-crushing sorrow.
He was conflicting simultaneously with all the powers of darkness, the demonic realm, and the unrestrained rage and madness of men.
He suffered in his soul, his body, his name, his reputation, his goods, in his life.
But the most terrifying aspect, according to Owen, involves penal substitutionary atonement.
While some of these sufferings came from devils and wicked men below, the heaviest blows came immediately from God above.
He was treated as the ultimate sin-bearer, absorbing the pure, unmitigated justice of God.
The Father did not cease to love the Son. Rather, the Father's wrath against sin was poured out on the Son in his capacity as the covenantal substitute.
To make this massive cosmic suffering intensely personal, Owen provides a vivid scenario in his writing.
He writes a hypothetical address, imagining Christ speaking directly to a ruined humanity represented by Adam in the garden.
The imagery Owen uses there is unforgettable.
He pictures Adam right after the fall. Adam has ruined himself and all his posterity.
He is standing there ashamed, terrified, trembling, fully expecting immediate eternal death under the displeasure of God.
And in that terrifying state, the Lord Christ approaches him to outline the covenant of grace.
And Christ says to him, "Look up. Come forth from your vain shelter, your hiding place. I will put myself into your condition.
I will undergo and bear that burden of guilt and punishment which would sink you eternally into the bottom of hell.
I will pay that which I never took and be made a curse for you, so that you may attain eternal blessedness."
I want to stop right here just to let that sink in.
Because this is not just a historical conversation with Adam.
Owen is very clear that Christ speaks this exact same way to convince sinners today. He is saying this to you, the listener.
That phrase, "I will pay that which I never took," is the very heart of the gospel.
It is the voluntary assumption of a debt he did not incur. It is the legal transfer of liability.
Think about how offended we get when someone asks us to apologize for something we didn't do.
No, human pride cannot handle that.
If you are accused of a mistake at work that was actually your coworker's fault, your immediate instinct is aggressive defensiveness.
You will send emails, you will pull up receipts, you will do whatever it takes to prove your innocence and clear your name.
We cannot stand to bear the tiny, fleeting consequences of someone else's minor error.
Now contrast our fierce defensiveness with Christ's willingness to step forward and absorb infinite, eternal punishment for cosmic crimes he did not commit.
He willingly paid a debt he never took.
That level of substitution offers life-altering relief to anyone who understands it.
But this leads to a massive contradiction in human history.
If this sacrifice offers such total relief, why is it so heavily rejected?
Why does the world look at the cross and see foolishness?
That is the exact tension Owen highlights as he contrasts the two totally different reactions to Christ's sufferings.
To the general world, both Jews and Gentiles, this entire concept is a stumbling block. It is a rock of offense.
From a strictly worldly perspective, you can understand their logic.
It seems completely irrational to look for your own help and deliverance through the absolute misery of someone else.
The world says, how can I find life through another man's brutal death?
The logic of the world dictates that you align yourself with winners, with the strong, with the victorious.
Aligning your eternal destiny with a man who was publicly executed by the Roman state, mocked and crushed, seems like pure foolishness.
I entirely agree with the worldly logic on paper.
On paper, following a defeated, crucified man seems completely absurd.
If a financial advisor came to you and told you to put your entire life savings into a bankrupt, liquidated company in order to get rich, you would laugh them out of the room.
It makes zero earthly sense to bet your life on a public execution.
That is where the spiritual lens changes everything.
Owen counters that worldly logic by pointing to 1 Corinthians 1 and 1 Peter 2.
To those who believe, to those whose eyes have been opened to the reality beneath the veil, this exact same foolishness is highly honorable.
It is infinitely precious. It represents the very wisdom and might of God.
The cross takes all human logic, all our metrics for success and glory, and flips them completely upside down.
God chose to display his absolute zenith of glory not in the sky with lightning bolts, but in the dust, the blood, and the quiet substitution of his Son.
As we wrap up this session, the question turns back to you. Which lens are you looking through?
Do you see the miseries of Christ as a strange, distant, historical tragedy?
Just another sad story of a good teacher who got on the wrong side of the government.
Or do you see it as the very foundation of your own life, your justification, and your peace?
We have covered massive ground today.
We started with the unseen glory of a creator freely submitting to his own laws.
We looked at his perfect living obedience under the most intense, hostile fire imaginable.
And we ended by looking at him standing as the ultimate substitute in an ocean of unfathomable suffering, paying a debt he never took.
It is a theological reality that demands a personal response.
You cannot remain neutral when confronted with a substitute of this magnitude.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day, building on what Owen has laid out.
If the absolute peak of cosmic glory was achieved not through conquering armies, not through accumulating massive wealth, and not through loud public dominance, but through hidden obedience, unjust suffering, and bearing the heavy burdens of others, what does that mean for the mundane, difficult, or painful parts of your own life?
What if the areas where you feel most obscure, most overlooked, or most unfairly burdened are actually the exact places where the most significant, unseen glory is being worked out in you, following the exact pattern of the Savior?
It is definitely something worth chewing on.
Thank you for joining this deep dive on Reformed thinking. Keep examining the unseen realities around you.